Get in, loser. We're going to be cutting out toxic relationships today. Hey, how are we doing? I am the amazing and all-powerful Reveros. Get it? Reverse arrows. No, needs a little bit of work. I'll take that into consideration. I'm still working on it. It's a work in progress. Anyway, I have been summoned here because I sense that you have some relationships that aren't exactly working for you. Now, on this very fine Valentine's Day Eve, I can't keep a straight face. Hate Valentine's Day. That's why I'm the Anti-Cupid. Now, what I do love is cutting out toxic, meaningless relationships for all those that need it. Now, I've been summoned here because you're one of those people that maybe needs to hear this. Now, I know, perhaps you might be thinking to yourself, Anti-Cupid, all my relationships are fine and it'll be fine, and maybe it doesn't always work out, but it'll be fine. I can manage. No. We're not doing that shit today. No. We're going to talk about toxic relationships, what they are, what they look like, and then we're going to talk a little bit about you are too important to deal with toxic relationships. You're too important. If you take absolutely anything away from this, it's that you are too important to deal with toxic relationships. All right? I promise you that. Now, you can get pissed off, you can get upset, you can get whatever you want if you find that your relationships, or perhaps even yourself, fit into these categories. And I would welcome you to. There is a sort of grieving process that happens when you realize you may be dealing with a toxic relationship, and I want you to embrace that. I want you to really think about it, and I want you to really mull that over and determine what the best course of action is for you, okay? You gotta do what's best for you, honey. Ain't nobody else going to, okay? The only person we are stuck with in this life is ourselves. That's the only person, okay? I want to do right by you, okay? And you do right by me by just listening. Now, I always have myself a little handout, and we can go over this one together, and I'll let you keep this one at the end so that you can review this on your own time, really digest what it is that I'm saying. So, relationships. They're bonds between lovers, friends, family, acquaintances. You don't necessarily have to be sleeping with someone to have a relationship, right? So these things can be romantic, they can be sexual, they can be platonic, they can be family-oriented, they could be just the great love of a friend, okay? And when I mean relationship, those are the 4 types that we are talking about. All right? With me so far? Good. If at any point you need me to stop, we need to discuss a little, you let me know. Got it? Okay. All right. So, toxic relationships are damaging emotionally and sometimes physically. There are elements of insecurity, self-centeredness, dominance, and control. Now, I personally have an absolute 0 tolerance policy for any sort of physical altercation between people. Now, I realize that when we talk about that, it gets pretty sensitive, right? Because the number one thing we want, number one, is that you're safe, okay? Keep that in mind. We want you to be safe. It's the biggest thing. Now, there are many different types of toxic relationships. And I once again want to remind you that you may also be guilty of these behaviors. And if you are, I want you to have a great long think about that, about your actions, about how your actions may have influenced your relationships, how you deal with other people. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on, all right? Keep that in mind. This isn't just for other people. This is also for yourself as well. First type is called the Depracator / Belittler type of toxic relationship. So these relationships are based on keeping the victim, I suppose, the victim's self-esteem low, as well as their trust in themselves and their decisions. So, like in the name, Belittler, the toxic person tends to belittle the other person, or they say they're just making fun, or they are teasing, or it's just a joke. These people also may describe themselves as brutally honest, or they tell it like it is. Those 2 particular terms should send up a little red flag, because oftentimes what that means is the person wants to be a cruel asshole and say cruel asshole things while hiding under the guise of it's a joke. It's like the age-old Schrodinger's douchebag problem. It's a joke based on how your audience reacts. So we want to keep this in mind when we start hearing people saying things that are very hurtful and then following it with just kidding or it's just a joke. It's not just a joke if it genuinely hurts you. There's a difference between bantering and general light teasing. There's another whole thing when it's just cruelty. And oftentimes when we're dealing with the deprecator belittler relationship, you may feel as if you can't trust your own decisions because they're always going to be wrong. They're always going to be bad. The other person is always going to tell you how stupid that was that you did that. So then even after that relationship may end, then you still are left with that insecurity and indecisiveness. So that really leaves some lasting damage. And I want to reiterate that even after these relationships may end, you may still feel those repercussions, those ripples later on. And that's something that you want to identify and focus on so you can heal and move on. The next one is called the bad temper. Now, this one, you may think of someone who has a very short temper, razor thin, hairpin trigger temper, right? Absolutely explosive, inappropriate anger, especially when you might be arguing with them. And you may not be able to get a word in edgewise, and you completely just disengage because absolutely no meaningful conversation is happening. And oftentimes these people will say that they wouldn't get mad if it wasn't for something that you did, that their anger is because of you. And I want to reiterate, it's not because of you. Their behavior is not your responsibility. You have the power to control your emotions and your actions. Well, I should say your emotions are just information and signals. You can't necessarily change that, but you can change how you respond to them. Same way with the people we're talking about, people we're dealing with. They can control their behavior and actions. They choose not to. And that is not your fault, right? So the next one is often used. It's one of the most common ways of control with parents, actually. And this is the Guilt-Inducer. So the Guilt-Inducer will oftentimes tell you that they feel disappointed in you, or they feel hurt by you when you do something that they don't like. That's not necessarily negative. For example, if you perhaps get a haircut and they don't like it, and they say they're very disappointed by the way you did that, that's kind of an inappropriate reaction to doing something that only involves yourself and only affects yourself. So sometimes when we see this with parents, it's if you don't go along with their plan for you or their idea of what you should be doing with your life, then they want to lay it on thick with the, I'm very disappointed with you. I'm very hurt by you doing this. Now, again, there's a difference between you perhaps doing something bad to someone else and them telling you that they're disappointed in your actions, they're disappointed in what you did, they're hurt by your actions. These people will tell you that they're disappointed in you as a person. They're hurt by you as a person, right? And the more they lay on that guilt, the more you just want to acquiesce to what they're saying so that you don't have to hear it. So you don't have to feel bad about making them feel disappointed and making them feel hurt. Okay? So after that, we have the Overreactor / Deflector. And this one quite mirrors the bad temper. And a lot of these will have quite similar attributes. And there may be relationships where you see almost all of these different aspects in it. So I want you to keep that in mind. With the Overreactor Deflector, they make everything your fault, and it's never their responsibility. So for example, if you're trying to tell them that something they've done has hurt you, then they turn it around and they make it about you. Quite like the bad temper, where they wouldn't be angry if you hadn't done something. It's they wouldn't have acted a certain way if it wasn't for you, if it wasn't for something that you did. It's never their fault. They can never take accountability. They can never apologize, never say sorry. It's always about you. And then you just succumb and go along with it because it's just easier, right? Yeah, it's hard. It's hard dealing with these, and that's why we're going through them, so we can identify these things and maybe think about how they relate in our own relationships. The next one is the overdependent. toxic relationship. Now, these ones let you take control by doing absolutely nothing at all. So they will let you handle everything, make all the plans, take care of everything, right? But then if you slip up, if you do something wrong, then they'll give you that passive-aggressive sort of pouting, silent treatment kind of deal. But they won't tell you what they want. They just want you to read their mind, and if you don't deliver, then they'll punish you for it. They exert their control by being as passive as possible, so that it doesn't look like they're trying to control you. Then it doesn't look like it's a toxic relationship. Okay? They let you take over everything. They have no responsibility. They don't have to worry about anything. But then if you mess up, it's all your fault. Now, the next one is somewhat the opposite of that, and this is the independent toxic relationship. This kind of person oftentimes will not do good on your commitments. They'll blow you off. They'll be quite vague. They may be quite cold as well. They're unpredictable, and what they're trying to do is get you to chase them so that you earn their commitment. If you were a better friend, then I would show up for this with you. If you were a better ex, then I would do this. But because you're not, then I don't have any need to show up. They tout themselves as not needing anyone at all. And you may think you want them to need you, to be able to lean on you, to have that bond, so you go chasing after them. And that's how they like it. Now, the next one is the user, and many of us know well enough about what that's about. It's a one-way, all-take, no-give relationship. But they may throw you a small bone once in a while, but only if it's something they don't really have any trouble doing. But then that favor gets held over you, becomes an obligation. Well, I did this for you, so the least you could do is X. Kind of like that. And it's sometimes hard to pick out this using relationship, because sometimes it's just that they call you whenever they need a shoulder to cry on, but then they never show up anytime else. So you think you have that intimate bond, but it's really just them taking everything from you, and then you don't have anybody in your corner. The last one is the possessive toxic relationship, and these are jealous and controlling people that seek to isolate you. It's like the people, like if you have a best friend, but then they get angry if you hang out with anybody else. Or they don't want you to see your family, your other friends. They just want you all to themselves. And if you're not with the people that they want you to be with, or you're not with them, then they want to exert that control. They might text you a bunch, call you a bunch. They might be really cold and distant when you finally do come around. Now, all of these different types of toxic relationships are hard to deal with. It's really difficult. It is. And all of us can be guilty of these things at one time or another. Now, these sort of relationships, they are these patterns of behavior. It certainly is a red flag if they have one instance, or maybe even two if you're real forgiving. But when you have multiple instances of these different behaviors happening, then you have a toxic relationship. All of these are red flags. Now, with a red flag, we want to stop and reassess. Now, I'm not saying that you couldn't continue to have a relationship with someone if for whatever reason absolutely everything else is okay. Then that's your call. That's up to you. But toxic relationships take two people. They take the person that is obviously the more toxic one and the one who lets it happen and continues to allow that person to treat them that way. Now, when we have people that you have known them forever, or they're related to you, you feel an obligation to them, maybe they were there for you in a really hard time, then you feel that sort of bond that you don't want to break. And it's very, very difficult. So this is where I suggest, if you think any of your relationships have these toxic behaviors in them, or even more so, if you are guilty of these behaviors, if it is possible, it's always good to seek out professional counsel. Now, I am aware that that's not always possible. Insurance in America, lack of resources, everybody's full. I understand. That's when you start moving to people that you do trust. For example, if you're religious, perhaps you go to a religious leader. If you are part of a group, perhaps go to a group leader. Might be your mama, it might be an elder, it might be someone that you've always gone to for advice and they've never steered you wrong before. It's always good to have a soundboard about that. Now, you don't absolutely need therapy for this, but oftentimes when you're in a toxic relationship, reason you stay in, not all the time, but oftentimes, is because there's an issue with self-esteem and an issue with it's just easier to let people treat you that way than to make a deal about it, right? Which comes back again, self-esteem, boundaries, okay? And a qualified professional should be able to help you with that and to help assess whether these are actually toxic relationships or maybe you're looking too much into them, okay? Now, again, the professionals, sometimes you have to go through a couple. Sometimes you have to go through a few. Oftentimes we need to find somebody we really click with before we can really get into those types of discussions. I want you to be aware of that. I want you to know that that's normal. It sucks. It really fucking sucks. But that's how it is, right? So I don't want you to be discouraged if after therapist number 4, it's still not clicking, okay? But I don't want you to take that as if everybody's disagreeing with you, that maybe there's something else going on, okay? I want you to also be very truthful to yourself and realize that, okay? And I don't want you to think that you have to burn bridges with everyone over a slip-up or two. Again, we're looking for patterns of these behaviors, okay? So everybody's human, everyone makes mistakes, everyone has a bad day. There are certain things that are absolutely inexcusable that we shouldn't put up with. For example, any sort of physical abuse going on. We should not be able to put up with that. We shouldn't. But we want to be safe. If we're dealing with any sort of physical altercation, we need to go to somebody we trust or a professional, and we need to make a plan to keep you safe, okay? Oftentimes, the worst part of leaving a toxic relationship that involves physical abuse is when the person is leaving. That's when it becomes the most dangerous. I am well aware of that particular risk. I've been through it a couple times, okay? I want you to know that you need to make sure you are safe, and it may take time, okay? But you have the ability to get out of these toxic relationships. If, for whatever reason, again, you feel like it might be a little bit too much hassle, or it's not worth it, sometimes it helps to make a pros and cons list, okay? There are certain things that are absolute deal breakers for you, your own boundaries, and then there are, more minor annoyances, and sometimes there are relationships you just have to put up with, and you have to take care of yourself. For example, if you have a toxic relationship with a parent, but you have to live with them for a certain amount of time, then it's good to get support, to talk to someone you trust, a friend, a support group, and take care of yourself until you're in the position to cut off that relationship. Okay? All right. So, I want you to really think about this. I want you to really think about if there's any relationships that have been bothering you, that have been one-sided, that don't exactly feel like you should be doing that. They don't feel healthy. And I want you to evaluate those, okay? You are too important for toxic relationships. And again, I want you to really think about if you've been doing any of these behaviors as well. I want you to make sure that if you are, again, we're seeking out professional counsel, or we're seeking out trusted individuals that can help us with that. We want to make sure that we're not doing these sort of things to other people. It's not helpful. It's not healthy. There's absolutely no reason we should be doing that. Okay? All right. So, let's get out some scissors. We're going to start with the big boys, I think. We're going to cut out those toxic relationships, okay? We're going to cut all the ties that bind us so that we can find the strength and find the fortitude to really evaluate these relationships and walk away if need be, all right? Okay, so let's grab that one, okay? We're going to pull this. Then we're just going to cut that off. All right? We're going to cut all the ties that bind us to other people. You are important. Your needs are just as valid as other people's, not more, not less. You deserve to have healthy relationships. You deserve to be happy in relationships. There may be disagreements and arguments, but you should be able to resolve them effectively without anyone holding a grudge. Relationships should be about enjoyment for both parties. And I want you to be able to have that. I want you to be able to have the strength to ask for what you need from another person. And I want you to have the compassion to be able to listen to the other person when they have needs as well. Now let's get into some smaller bonds. There we go. Pulling and cutting those away. Cutting those toxic mindsets and toxic behaviors. There are good people in the world, and we want to be good to them back. It's important that we listen to other people, but it's also important that we're listened to as well. I want you to have that. I want you to have relationships that fulfill you and are fulfilling for the other person as well. Relationships are a two-way street. You have to both give and take an equal amount. And that doesn't have to be all the time. Sometimes one person gives 40 and the other 60. Sometimes it's 70-30. But if overall the relationship is not 50-50, then it's not necessarily a good one. And we want to work on that. Oftentimes with dealing with toxic relationships, we have to confront the person about their behavior. There are instances where they don't realize they're doing what they are. They don't realize how it's making you feel. Sometimes you have to give them a timeline, that if the behaviors don't change within a certain amount of time, then you're done with the relationship. There may be an occasional slip up, but again, we want to watch out for that pattern. Cutting the ties that bind us to toxic relationships. And let's get into some of the real heavy-duty scissors. Now, I want to support you when we're dealing with more difficult relationships. For example, perhaps our parents. Perhaps it's a romantic relationship. Perhaps it's a childhood friend. Any sort of intense emotional relationship. I want to give my support to you for that. Those are hard. They really are. But I also want you to find the strength to stay strong and face of those particular relationships, of confronting them, and if you have to, letting them go. It's better to be alone than it is to be with someone who treats you badly. Life's too short for that. But it's never too late to get out of one of those toxic relationships and start anew. It's never too late. Doesn't matter if you've been in one 10 months, 10 years, 20 years. There's better things for you. There's better people. It's hard. I know it is. Especially with a lot of those relationships that you thought you'd always have, that the other person just can't hear you out. And it would be so good if they just did this one thing and just helped you out here. It's really not that difficult to just treat somebody else fairly, right? I know, it is really hard. It's really hard. But you can still live a full, fulfilling life with better people that will treat you well, with healthier relationships. It's never too late. Doesn't matter if the relationship was 10 months long, 10 years long, 20. You can still try to have something better for yourself. Now finally, we're going to do just a little bit of adjustment here. Just a little bit of adjustment. Okay? We're going to take those last little bits and just snip them off. Snip, snip, snip. Okay? Alright. So, whether it's insecurity or it's fear, or maybe anxiety, sadness, or sometimes it's even a sunk cost fallacy, where you feel like you've put in so much time and so much effort, you don't want to just give up, right? I mean, because then all of it's a waste, right? It's not. It's not a waste. Sometimes you do everything you can, and it doesn't matter. And that has nothing to say about you, but instead says a lot about the other person, okay? I want you to believe that you should be able to have healthy relationships. Shouldn't be a luxury, but it's something you gotta actively work with. I wish you strength. And I wish you support. I wish you safety. I wish you contentment. I wish you self-love above all. It's the key to getting out of these toxic relationships. Being by ourselves. Again, it's better to be by yourself than it is to be with someone who treats you poorly. Loneliness is worth it. You can always find other people. There's a shit ton of people in this world. There's someone out there who'll treat you well. Just have to go find them. All that time and effort you spend with toxic relationships could be with one relationship that brings you so much joy and enjoyment with another person. And has a place to go. All that effort, all that time. There we go. Now, to reiterate, when we are dealing with toxic relationships, it is very highly recommended to seek professional counsel about it so you can determine that the relationship is indeed toxic, and perhaps if we're dealing with an abusive situation, then we need to have a plan and we need to stick to it, okay? We want you to be safe. Safety is the priority, okay? Big letters, everything all ablaze. Safety is everything, okay? I know it's difficult, but I believe in you. The Riveros believes in you. Yeah, it's still not working, is it? It's still not working. Not doing it for me. That's fine. That's fine. We'll come up with something eventually. Yeah. All right. So you think about those relationships that you have doubts about, you evaluate them, and I hope you can do what is best for you. All right? What's best for you. The only person we are stuck with in our lives are ourselves. We're stuck. It's the only person you have to deal with, okay? Everything else, you can find new people, you can find new things, you can find fulfillment and enjoyment and contentment with people that are more than willing to have a healthy relationship with you. All right? Okay. Anti-Cupid out.